After a record 2025, 2026 kicked off with many countries expecting another tourism boom. But few predicted the shock of the Iran war. The Middle East is losing around $600 million a day in international visitor spending, and the fallout is spreading to tourism economies around the world. To understand where the global tourism economy is heading and why the way we travel may be changing forever, we are joined by Andreas Papatheodorou. He's the head of Department of Tourism, Economics and Management at the University of Aegean in Greece. Thank you so much for being part of this very important discussion. I want to start with the idea of what we're heading into in 2026. 2025 was a record year for global tourism, but this year opened with war risk, fuel volatility, disrupted air routes, and many other unexpected situations. So from an economist's perspective, are we looking at short-term shock, or is this likely to have lasting structural impact or a structural reset on how the world travels?
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the great question as well, which is, however, rather difficult to answer. As you rightly said, 2025 was a record year in terms of tourism arrivals. So international tourism arrivals exceeded 1.5 billion people. At the same time, international tourism receipts were very close to $2 trillion. So very good year. It's very difficult to tell what's going to happen in 2026 because on the one hand, regarding preferences, people are definitely interested in traveling, in exploring the world. Business tourism is also booming. At the same time, we have adverse consequences regarding the fuel prices, how this will affect airfares. And obviously, we all know that tourism is a risk-averse activity. So where there is an increased level of geopolitical uncertainty, that may have negative repercussions for tourism as well. So the big thing is whether this is just transitional or whether it's going to be something permanent. It's difficult to tell. The problem is that we're currently entering into the summer season, which is typically a peak season in the Northern Hemisphere, especially in popular destinations like the Mediterranean. So far, we haven't had any major cancellations, but again, it's a question mark in terms of how things will evolve.
Greece is an example of a country that does have a huge tourism economy, but what they do offer is a very diverse type of tourism economy, like sun, sand, beach, history. You know, you're catering to very different types of visitors. How much would you say that cushions Greece from, shocks that may affect other countries almost immediately?
Well, the very idea is not to put all your eggs into one basket and to have different products in order to cater for different markets. But the most important thing here is perception. So if we talk about Northern Europeans, they have a very good understanding of geography. They understand that Greece is far away from the area of conflict, and I don't believe that they see any reason to cancel the holidays. If we talk about people who come from further away, especially from the Americas or even from Southeast Asia, that might be a different story because perception of geography starts getting different. So even Greece in practice is far away from the area of conflict. They may have a different understanding and perception of actual geography. So in psychology, we talk about a term called cognitive distance. So that very much relates to how close we are to a certain destination. So if we don't know much about that, if we're not aware of this geography, then that might affect tourism flows as well.
I just want to take a bigger picture look at the global tourism market. According to the 2025 UN Tourism Report, the volume of international travel increased by 4%. That's 60 million more travelers to around 1.5 billion from the year before. Total export revenues from tourism for that period shot up to approximately $2.2 trillion in 2025. That is nearly 6% higher than in 2024. Europe retained its number one destination status in 2025, welcoming 793 million international visitors. The Asia Pacific comes next with 331 million. The Americas registered 218 million international visitors, followed by Africa with 81 million, while the Middle East edged towards the 100 million milestone. If the Iran war keeps oil prices elevated, therefore fuel charges will increase. How will that affect the relationship? And how does that translate on the ground, or does it not translate on the ground, as far as tourism footfall goes?
Very important question. Well, first of all, the two sectors are structurally interrelated indeed. Very few people fly for the sake of flying. Most people fly to go somewhere and do something. So typically they go to a destination and they engage in leisure, business activities, visiting friends and relatives, and so on. So essentially the demand for tourism is very important, and the demand for transport is of derived nature, which means that if there is no demand for tourism, there is no demand for transport. But at the same time, if the price of air travel rises substantially, then a number of certain destinations may be very negatively affected. First of all, we have to look at some distances, as we said before. So if, for example, you can go to a place by a train, and if this train is run by electricity, then the effect might not be that high. But if we typically talk about countries which are islands, or which have many island destinations, or which are remotely located compared to major source markets, then travel is of utmost importance. So in the case of Greece, about 75 to 80% of our inbound tourism is by air. In countries like Cyprus or Malta, which are islands in the Mediterranean, that might be up to 100%. So when fuel prices go up, that may have a negative effect on tourism as well, because airfare may constitute a substantial element of the overall expenditure. Of course, as I said before, we need to consider distances. So if we talk about short-haul travel, then the overall impact might not be that high. If we talk about long-haul travel, it may be different, because the overall impact of an air travel fuel rise is higher. We also need to consider the type of airlines. Just to give you an example, if we talk about low-fare airlines, typically like Ryanair, EasyJet, Wizz Air in Europe, or Southwest in the Americas, or it could be AirAsia in Asia, and so on. Many of these carriers engage in what we call fuel hedging. So fuel hedging is about protecting the fuel price based on a contract. So essentially what they do is they buy contracts which allow them to freeze fuel prices at a certain level. Now, many low-cost carriers do so because they want to keep their overall cost under control, because this is the narrative of the model, to push cost under control and to be able to be profitable even with a modest price.
Often at the center of geopolitical headlines is Taiwan, whose powerful neighbor China claims it as part of its own territory. Beijing often conducts military exercises in the surrounding air and waters and has not ruled out taking it by force. So has this been reflected in tourist arrivals? Well, in short, no. Taiwan welcomed approximately 8.5 million international visitors in 2025, marking a 9% increase from the year before. Now, that growth is driven by a strong recovery in arrivals from Asia, like from Japan, Hong Kong, Macau, and South Korea.
Coming from Europe, I believe that Taiwan is a beautiful place. We know that the old name was Formosa, the beautiful island. There's plenty to see and do. I've never been to Taiwan, but I'm certainly looking forward to visiting Taiwan one day. And then I think it's about perceptions related to actual versus potential conflict. So at present, things are calm in terms of how the situation is. I think that most people are not unaffected by a wider geopolitical instability, provided that they don't see a real action. I mean, if you look at Dubai, Dubai is a major and very important place to visit in the Middle East. Everybody was aware of the tension that existed between US, Israel, and Iran for quite some time. I mean, back in February, we did see some actual conflict, but if you look at inbound tourism in Dubai, even before the war started, it was still in quite well. And so people are obviously quite worried about what may happen overall, but they certainly put much more emphasis into places where actually they suffer from immediate type of conflict and negative consequences related to that.
What trends or patterns are you looking into in the travel industry or the travel economies in the coming few years?
Well, in terms of the big picture, in terms of the more strategic issues, definitely we all keep talking about the concept of sustainability, which has three pillars: economic, social, and environmental, and especially observing environmental protocols is of utmost importance, especially because of climate change. At the same time, it's not only about sustainability, it's also about resilience. So resilience is how to be in a position to absorb shocks and how to develop a way forward. And from sustainability and resilience, we go to more effective portfolio management, which means don't put all your eggs into one basket. If you're a destination, do seek alternative source markets. At the same time, it's about not over-relying on a single source of income or even a single source of fuel. So there's lots of discussion, for example, in terms of transport, about developing sustainable aviation fuel, about relying less on kerosene, on jet A1, which is so far almost the exclusive fuel used by transport. There is a wide discussion about, depending more on alternative sources of energy rather than, kerosene, or rather than fuel in general, which is coming from traditional sources. So I would say that the future is about being open, being more transparent, being more cosmopolitan, but at the same time being alert in order to become more resilient, and at the same time stay sustainable and make sure that, as we said earlier, destinations do not become victims of their own success.